Now, if you've been following this channel for a bit, you've likely realized something. I am a nerd. I sit around and I think about comics and movies every second of every day. And the new topic neurotically infecting my mind is wondering how good or bad the new upcoming DC cinematic universe being shaped by James Gunn will be. That new DCU is just about here, with its first official installment, Creature Commandos. And I have to be honest, I'm actually somewhat hopeful about the whole thing. After a decade of DCEU movies utterly failing to capture much of the magic that makes the DC Comics universe it's based on so special, we now have someone in charge who has a proven track record of making comic characters and worlds immensely popular with audiences. James Gunn is the guy who's made fucking Groot a household name. That's pretty impressive. What I've seen of Creature Commandos looks fun. Gunn's previous DC projects were pretty well received, and the bits we've seen about Superman seem like they may actually capture the spirit of the character in a way those baby-eating psychopaths over in Hollywood have had trouble doing since the original film with Christopher Reeves. So I'm starting to feel a bright little glimmer of hope. But if there's one thing DC is good at, it's taking whatever hope you feel and crushing it beneath its unrelenting boot, unzipping its pants, and pissing on it while laughing at your naive optimism. And when it comes to movies, we've just been forced to endure 8 box office bombs in a row, 6 of which were some of the worst movies I've ever seen. I'll let you guess which of those were below. Yeah, I loved all 3 Guardians movies and enjoyed Gunn's DC projects so far, but as a prestigious member of the Actually Reads comics community, there were some things that did bother me a bit about all those projects. For a few movies in a shared universe, those things really weren't a big deal, but now Gunn's in charge of shaping the entire DC universe on film, so some of those itty-bitty little nitpicks could easily grow out to be franchise-killing flaws if left unchecked. So I'm making sure to temper my expectations and keeping an eye out for any red flags that this whole DCU thing could go south. And honestly, as much as I hate to admit it, those red flags really haven't been that hard to find. Red flag 1. Mix and match continuity. When we learned Gunn was coming in and kicking Cavill and Gadot out of the new DCU he was building, a lot of people were fucking disgruntled, to say the least. I don't think many people were bummed about losing Ezra Miller or, Jesse Eisenberg's Lex, but Cavill and Gadot were pretty damn close to iconic in their roles. And we'd just been teased with Cavill's Superman returning and that ill-conceived Black Adam end credits cameo. But most rationally minded fans understood that we needed a clean break from the bloated, disorganized, and money-losing pit that the DCEU had become. Whatever our personal feelings, a clean reboot was probably a good idea. But is that what we're getting? Or are we just getting another mess? We soon learned that John Cena would stay as Peacemaker, as well as Viola Davis's Amanda Waller and maybe even Blue Beetle's Zolo Maradueno if the movie did well? So wait, what the hell is this thing then? It's not a clean break. Are the actors returning as totally new versions of these characters? Were the characters' continuity being kept too? Or just elements of it? I mean, Peacemaker had straight up met the Justice League, with Flash and Aquaman being featured prominently in a time when it seemed they were going to be kept in the roles, but we now know they aren't. Peacemaker and Waller both met Rick Flag and Harley Quinn, who'd been in the previous Suicide Squad with Ben Affleck as Batman putting together a Justice League, and Superman had died. Was that still in continuity? I mean, obviously not Ben Affleck, but what about Superman's death? Has David Corenswet's Superman died? Had he been shot and went into a coma from a kryptonite bullet shot by Bloodsport? Did Starro attack Corton Maltese? And most importantly, was Slipknot still dead? Weasel's also returning in Creature Commandos, as well as Rick Flag Sr. being introduced. Peacemaker's getting a season 2. Not a new series, so that implies that at least Gunn's previous projects are remaining canon, but those projects tied to other DCEU projects, so what the hell's canon with what? So obviously people went to James Gunn for answers, and he replied with a very straightforward, LOL, who cares? That wasn't very reassuring to people like me. Basically, he told us all that anything shown or referenced in Creature Commandos Forward would be canon, and that most of Peacemaker would be canon. And then he went on to say that all of this shit was not real, and canon is the friends we made along the way. It's the characters and stories that matter, not all the little details. I'm personally a huge comic book continuity fan, but even I can see he's not exactly wrong. What's the point of him throwing away the stories and characters he personally worked on just because the people above him at the time were fucking terrible at their jobs? But on the other hand, what's the point in even doing a shared universe of stories if you're not at least somewhat strict on what the continuity even is? We really can't know what the continuity of this new universe will be until Superman comes out, but with the mess of continuity from the DCEU leading to what was so bad about that whole thing, I'd be less worried if we had a sense that canon was going to be taken more seriously in this iteration. Red Flag 2. Changing established characters into completely brand spanking new original characters. Guardians of the Galaxy had some great characters. I love Rocket Raccoon, Star-Lord, and Drax. But I also like these other characters from this movie called Guardians of the Galaxy, who are also named Rocket, Star-Lord, and Drax. They're really not very similar to each other, but I do love both versions. My point is, James Gunn is good at a lot of things, but if there's one thing he's not good at, it's adapting characters accurately from the comic. Yes, Gamora is fairly close to her comic counterpart, and his version of Thanos felt like he walked right off the page. But Gunn seems to have quite the habit of just grabbing up superficial elements of a character, tossing away everything else, and creating a brand new character from whatever pieces are left. The characters he creates are great, entertaining, well-written, and really suit the story he's telling. But you have to admit, this is a consistent trend from the guy. In Guardians 2, Ego is a planet, and Mantis has empathic abilities and antenna. But otherwise, they're almost completely original characters. In Guardians 3, the same thing goes for High Evolutionary, Phyla-Vell, and Adam Warlock. Sure, you've got making animal people in gold skin, but the parts of a character that makes them a character and not just a design or power set are often completely rewritten in his movies. And that's not even getting into less known characters like poor old Taserface. Just take Rocket Raccoon as an example. He was not created by the High Evolutionary, he was not an outlaw rebel bounty hunter, he was not inseparably close to Groot, and he originally had a Cockney accent. The movie version is virtually an entirely different character. A great character who I love dearly, yes, but still a different character. And that goes for so many of Gunn's versions of characters. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think movie Rocket and Groot are far more popular and beloved than doing straight comic adaptations would have been, and Gunn puts a lot more love into these characters than the assholes at She-Hulk or Eternals did. But the truth is, besides comic fans, which is a pretty small minority of the movie-going audience, most people didn't know who the fuck these characters were before the movies, so changing them doesn't really matter that much. But when it comes to characters like Superman, Jimmy Olsen, Lois Lane, or Lex Luthor, I worry. These characters are iconic and known by just about everyone. One of the main reasons Man of Steel's version of Superman was not well received was how much he strayed from everyone's idea of the character of Superman. So far, we've got 3 DC projects out of Gunn, and all of them have had character changes that make me concerned. I'm not going to complain about Polka Dot Man or Vigilante being changed. Besides their costumes, the both of them really aren't that memorable in comics. But there's one little character who does make me worried about the entire plan for the DCU. Arm Fall Off Boy. They called him the Detachable Kid in the movie. I'm not sure if they wouldn't let him use the name or what, but it's the same character. His arms come off. Well, so fucking what, brah? I hear you ask. He's just one random stupid D-list villain, right? Well, no, actually. Arm Fall Off Boy is not a villain at all. He was a wannabe hero who tried to join the Legion of Superheroes in the 31st century, but was rejected. If you look at lists of bizarre and stupid comic characters, he's often pretty far near the top. But that's always ill-informed because he was not created to be a serious character. He was created to be exactly what he is, a purposefully silly idea. You may or may not know of the Legion of Superheroes, but in DC continuity, they are a big fucking deal. They were inspired by the legends of Superman to travel back in time and meet Clark when he was young. They team up many times and are a huge inspiration to the young Clark Kent on his path to becoming Superman. Using Arm Fall Off Boy like this worries me that they aren't taking the source material seriously, which I know is a very strange sentence to say in relation to Arm Fall Off Boy. But it seems like James Gunn just grabbed the character up from a list and tossed him onto the team because he thought the power would be funny. And it was. That part was funny. But the character belongs with the Legion continuity, not with a bunch of D-list super criminals. There are already plenty of others to choose from. If he'd used an obscure, silly-looking villain like Ten-Eyed Man, this would have been a lot more fitting. But sure, whatever. Quit whining about fucking Arm Fall Off Boy, right? But Gunn did the exact same thing with Matter-Eater Lad in Peacemaker when Peacemaker references a team-up with him. Matter-Eater Lad is not a superhero out there fighting crime in the streets of DC Comics. He's also associated with the Legion of Superheroes in the 31st century, and was created for similar reasons. When Gunn took the original Guardians of the Galaxy, who are also in the future in Marvel Comics, and turned them into a modern-day criminal group called the Ravagers, it's a huge departure. But in the grand scheme of Marvel, the original Guardians are only a teensy-weensy blip. It doesn't really affect the greater universe at all. but any DC fan knows that the Legion of Superheroes are a huge part of the DC universe. They're directly tied to Superman's lore and have stories dating back over 60 years. There are a lot of characters and concepts that can bend very easily without breaking, like the Guardians of the Galaxy. But there are a lot of characters at DC who may seem obscure to an outsider, but are very popular with fans, and if you bend them too much, they just will not work. So far, Gunn hasn't done that with anyone who would matter too much, but using characters from Legion lore like this gives me huge worries for what the makeup of the universe will be going forwards. Red Flag 3. Why is everyone old as shit? When Henry Cavill was unceremoniously booted out of the DCU, I imagined it would be to replace him with someone younger. The guy's entering his 40s. Sure, he still looks like fucking Adonis, but if they're planning to run this new DCU for the next decade and beyond, they'd want to cast someone younger. And they did, but only by about 10 years, which surprised me, but whatever, sounds good. We were all curious who they'd cast next to match this 30-some-year-old Superman. Well, we learned soon after that one of his co-stars would be Nathan Fillion as Green Lantern Guy Gardner, my personal favorite DC character, side note. I was a bit confused since the dude's in his fucking 50s, while Guy Gardner's, the same age as every other fucking hero in DC, but I thought maybe they were gonna have him play younger? Then another favorite of mine, Mr. Terrific, was casted as Idai Gothurgi, who's in his 40s. And now we've learned that the iconic greatest of the Green Lanterns, Hal fucking Jordan, will be played by Kyle Chandler, who's nearly a 60-year-old man. And let's toss good old John Cena, who will be 50 in a few years, onto that pile as well. Now, I like all these guys. They're all good actors. I think they'd be great in the roles. Like 20 fucking years ago, clearly the DCU James Gunn is building is one where all the heroes have appeared at totally different times instead of around the same time. But a world where frickin' Guy Gardner is on the scene before fucking Superman is a red flag for me. And then the question to ask is, why not just continue with Henry Cavill in the role if this is the route you're going? Why recast everyone as younger actors, then start casting actors in their literal 60s? I'll have to see how it all looks when it comes together. I mean, it could be awesome. Not everything needs to match the comics, but dear lord, imagine they decide to bring in the Justice Society. Will we get Ian McKellen as Jay Garrick and William Shatner as Alan Scott? Actually, that sounds pretty fucking sweet. Maybe this whole thing will work. Red Flag 4. Songs, baby. James Gunn is obviously a huge fan of music. He actually seems like a bigger fan of music than he is of comics. The soundtrack of Guardians of the Galaxy truly was an awesome mix. And continuing into Guardians 2 and 3, Gunn used more music to accompany the action scenes and emotional beats of the films. And then he did the same thing in The Suicide Squad. And he did it again in Peacemaker. And it sounds like he's doing it again in Creature Commandos. So it's very reasonable to expect that's how the soundtrack to Superman will be as well. But Superman ain't like those other guys. He's a really, really old character. For any song you use in his movie, it's likely that the person who fucking wrote it is younger than Superman is. And DC characters are different than Marvel characters. Marvel heroes pretty much exist in our world. They've always been more contemporary and grounded. The major DC heroes are icons who've transcended pop culture into myth. Superman and Batman will likely outlive our civilization much as Hercules or Zeus have in theirs. What frickin' song do you attach to that? They're more mythic and majestic than the Marvel heroes, and so I think they work best with big epic orchestral soundtracks like the themes John Williams, Danny Elfman, or Hans Zimmer composed for them in the past. A bunch of junky cool songs tossed across their moments in the movies feels like it'd be a bit cheap to me. Now, maybe that's what these characters need. Something cool and hip to make the kids like them again. I wonder if James Gunn has the restraint to not just fill these movies with his favorite playlists. Or if he does fill them with songs, do so in a way that stays true to the spirit of the characters. But I swear if fucking Kryptonite plays over that frickin' trailer. The 5th red flag. I don't think James Gunn even reads comics. James Gunn seems pretty hip with the superhero vibe. He posts retro Silver Age covers or Alex Ross art of characters from DC on the old social media. But is he actually a comic nerd? Or is he some kind of pod person trying to hide amongst us? Listening to the guy, I'm pretty sure he read comics in the past when he was a young lad or hip 20-year-old. I'm also sure he's read a lot of the popular ones that every hipster with one foot in the comic world has at least pretended to read, like Batman Year One or Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. And I can tell he has a lot of endearment towards the oddities of comics, specifically Silver Age covers and characters. But I don't think he's what we in the biz would call a comic book nerd. Now, is that a bad thing? I don't know. People like Christopher Nolan don't seem to know much about comics, and then he made fucking Dark Knight. But then he also made Dark Knight Rises. And then there's people like Joss Whedon who have clearly read a lot of comics, and he was able to put the Avengers together in a way that felt true to the source material. But then we got a Justice League so bad out of him that it killed his career. In the modern day, it's feeling like every new person in charge of your favorite comic characters knows less than the person before. And Gunn does seem to know more than the assholes who are just butchering everything. To me, Gunn seems a lot like Ryan Reynolds, who I don't think reads through all this shit, but knows enough about it to fake his way through in a way that's entertaining to comic fans and non-comic fans alike. The Suicide Squad had a lot of elements to it that channeled the spirit of the older comics, so I believe Gunn likely read through at least some of those at one point. But Guardians, Peacemaker, and what we're seeing from Creature Commandos tell me that he isn't that deep in the lore of the characters like a regular reader would be. DC's Frankenstein is one of my favorite characters at the company, but from what I've seen of him in the show, I doubt Gunn's ever read his Seven Soldiers appearances, and that's only 4 fucking issues. I don't know about you, but if I was hired to adapt something and I only needed to read 4 issues to get it right, I would do that. For comparison, look at shows like Batman the Animated Series, Young Justice, Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, or even X-Men 97. When I watch these shows, I can tell you for a fact that the people in charge of making them not only read comics, but absolutely fucking love comics. There's so much passion in their shows to both tell good stories and to bring the comic world they love so much to life on the screen. And all these shows have huge dedicated fan bases, while in many of the movies, especially modern ones, they're changing things left and right or just straight making shit up without giving a fuck. Sometimes it does well and sometimes it just bombs. A talented creator like Gunn will be able to make something good or cool whether or not he follows the source material. But will it be the DC universe? Or will it be the Gunverse featuring elements that are familiar to DC? I like the guy, but I'm here for something I like a lot more. DC. My favorite comic universe with some of the greatest characters ever created. We just had a decade of a DC universe built up by a guy who only superficially knew the source material. I worry that as much as I like Gunn more than that guy, we may be getting that again. Now, all that being said, I am actually still quite hopeful. I think Creature Commandos will be good, regardless of if there are any actual fucking Creature Commandos in it, and I can't help but have high hopes for Superman with what little we've seen. What really matters here is if the DCU is successful, not if I personally, as a comic fan, approve of it. I fucking hate how Michael Bay adapted Transformers, and look how successful that was. And I loved how Dredd adapted the Judge Dredd comics, and look how hard that fucking bombed. The honest truth is that I am not the target audience. Everyone in the world who would even kinda want to see a Superman movie is the target audience. So I'm quite curious to see how the wider world accepts these movies. If I'm being absolutely honest, I don't think James Gunn is the best person in the world for the job of building the DC universe on film. But I also truly believe he's the absolute best we currently have in the dumpster fire we call Hollywood. So I wish him luck, because I just want good DC movies. Is that so much to fucking ask for? It's Superman. He's been published for 80 fucking years straight and is still popular. Get a good fucking movie out before he falls into the public domain and we're flooded with a bunch of shitty horror movie versions. Well, that's all, folks. Want to listen to me speculate more about upcoming crap? Click that subscribe button and we'll ride this wave of shit together through good and the oh so bad. Want to see some other analysis and critique from a brilliant mind being directed at the most useless of topics? I got a whole crop of videos with more coming as soon as I can shovel them out. So until next time, see you, space cowboy.